two potential battleground states had to deal with long lines and a lot of confusion as they cast their ballots in yesterday's primary elections. In Nevada, in-person voting was limited to a small number of stations due to concerns over the spread of the coronavirus, while Georgia is facing harsh criticism after voters reported major issues casting their ballots. So for more on this, we're going to bring in political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, before we get to what we know about the results, what's going on in Georgia and Nevada? What caused the confusion and the holdup?
Perfect storm of issues in the Peach State, Anne-Marie, caused real headaches, especially early on yesterday morning. Look, there's the pandemic, of course, the fact that it's requiring social distancing and that in some cases, places that would normally be a voting site aren't open. That's not unique to Georgia. You also had in this state new voting machines that for the first time include a touchscreen look, but also a paper trail. You've got to take a piece of paper and get a QR code on it and then hand it in to create proof that you actually voted. This is something that voting rights advocates have been pushing for across the country. New machines and personnel who don't normally work the polls who didn't necessarily know how to use the machines, so user error. And then you've got just general concerns about how the elections are run in Georgia, a state, of course, that has a history of voter suppression. The Republican Secretary of State blaming counties that are predominantly Democratic around Atlanta for mostly dropping the ball, although there were reports of problems with these machines across the state. The county officials pointing back at the state officials and saying, no, this is on you, because elections for statewide office and for the presidency are run by the state. So a lot of finger pointing going on and a lot of unique issues coming together on a primary day. In Nevada, it was the same deal. Fewer voting sites open meant that people were in line until, get this, 3:14 a.m. Pacific time today was the last time, according to some advocates in Nevada, a vote was cast. That is more than 8 hours after the polls were supposed to close in the Silver State. But again, because there were fewer locations, because of social distancing, people had to wait that long. Can you imagine, guys, if that happens in November? This is a real
well, that was my question, Ed.
All across the country.
Yeah, that was my question to you. What are these officials in these states saying about the upcoming November election? What steps are they putting in place to ensure that it doesn't happen?
Well, look, in some cases they're expanding access, if you will, to voting or increasing the supply of ballots. California's gone the farthest. They're going to send an absentee ballot to every active registered voter in the state. Other states are taking it upon themselves to send applications for an absentee ballot to every voter who can then send it back, and then we'll get one in the mail and then can send it back in. There's, in some cases, expanding early voting and on election day, encouraging people, if they want to use the absentee ballot system, which most states have a pretty rigorous version of it, and then saying, look, if you have to show up in person, A, be prepared to stand 6 feet away from the next guy, and B, you might have to wait a while because given that we have to put these restrictions in place, it's going to take a little longer. The issue, though, with expanding absentee balloting in some of these places is that they're now getting more ballots sent back to them, and it's taking longer to count them. This was a problem over the past week in Pennsylvania. They held their primary last week. Demand exceeded the manpower, and it took some sections of suburban Philadelphia and Pittsburgh another week to count their ballots. So again, imagine if this happens in November. What do these elections officials say they need? More money and more manpower. And other advocates, Republicans and Democrats, say all these states have to expand access to early voting, making it easier for people to vote by mail if they want to, so that somehow their vote gets cast and it doesn't put too much pressure on either side of the system.
So listen, I want to talk about the outcome of these primaries. Joe Biden picked up more delegates in Georgia and in the West Virginia primaries. He is the presumptive nominee, but we still have several months to go. You know, what will Joe Biden be doing sort of in the coming months?
Well, he's got to find a way to insert himself into the conversation generally. Of course, the president, as the incumbent, has the advantage of the bully pulpit, as they say, or has the ability to just inject himself into the news by virtue of his day job. In the case of Biden, he's got to find ways to get out there. He did that this week. He flew, of course, to Houston on Monday to meet with the family of George Floyd. That wasn't a crassly political move. This is something he's very concerned about. But certainly his campaign understands that by doing so, by recording a video message for that funeral, by being involved in this national conversation, despite his checkered past on race relations, he at least is reminding people that he is a strong alternative to the president if people are looking for it. On Thursday, he's doing an event there in Philadelphia where you are, Anne-Marie, on the economy. And it's going to be that kind of thing, finding ways to talk about what's going on in the news right now and reminding people that he's a strong contrast to Joe Biden. There were 5 states that voted yesterday. Most critically, there were congressional primaries. In Georgia right now, the Democratic primary is too close to call. 2 leading candidates, if one of them doesn't get 50%, there will be a runoff in about 60 days. They're trying to take on the incumbent Republican David Perdue. In South Carolina, Lindsey Graham had a crowded Republican primary. He prevailed, but he faces a stronger than expected challenge from Democrat Jamie Harrison, who's been raising money hand over fist, in part because he's running against Lindsey Graham, who's well known across the country. And a bunch of House primaries out in Nevada. Las Vegas area congressional races are some of the most competitive in the country because it's a very swingy part of a swing state. And so the Republican candidates were picked to take on the Democratic incumbents. All of those races will matter in November for the balance of power. And that's why, again, it's so frustrating to see that there were problems at the polls. And yet, you got to give credit, guys, to people who were willing to wait in line for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours if they had to cast a ballot. Certainly, that's the kind of motivation and enthusiasm that candidates on both sides of the aisle will be counting on if the lines are long in November.
So true, Ed. Thank you so much.
Take care.